Have you ever wondered why you said yes to a salesperson or a request when you really wanted to say no? What if I told you there are specific psychological triggers that can control your behavior without you even realizing it? Today on Book Summaries channel, we are breaking down the masterpiece of Persuasion, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. We'll explore the 6 universal principles that govern how we are influenced and how you can use these tools ethically or defend yourself against them. In this opening chapter, Cialdini introduces the concept of fixed action patterns, which are automatic behaviors triggered by a single piece of information. Just as a mother turkey protects her chicks solely based on a specific cheep sound, humans often rely on mental shortcuts to navigate a complex world. These shortcuts are efficient, but leave us vulnerable to compliance professionals who know how to trigger our automatic responses. Cialdini explains the click, a phenomenon where a stimulus leads to a predictable sequence of actions. For example, using the word because often triggers compliance regardless of the actual reason provided. He also introduces the contrast principle, which shows how our perception is altered by the order in which we experience things. If a salesperson shows you an expensive suit first, a moderately priced sweater will seem much cheaper than it actually is. Understanding these triggers is the first step toward reclaiming your decision-making power. We often act on autopilot, and this chapter serves as a wake-up call to those subconscious habits. By learning these weapons of influence, you can start to see the invisible threads being pulled in everyday interactions. It is the foundation for the 6 core principles discussed later in the book. This chapter sets the stage by proving that our rationality is often bypassed by evolutionary shortcuts. The principle of reciprocation states that we feel an overwhelming obligation to repay what another person has provided us. This rule is so powerful that it often overrides our personal feelings toward the person making the request. Even an uninvited favor or a small gift can create a sense of indebtedness that leads us to agree to a much larger return favor. Cialdini notes that this rule was vital for human evolution, allowing for the sharing of resources and labor within a society. However, in the modern world, it is frequently exploited by organizations that give free samples to boost sales. A subtle variation of this rule is the rejection then retreat tactic, where a person makes an extreme request that is likely to be rejected. After the rejection, they make a smaller, more reasonable request, which we perceive as a concession. Because they made a concession, we feel a reciprocal obligation to make one ourselves by saying yes to the second request. This tactic is incredibly effective because it uses the contrast principle alongside reciprocation. To defend yourself, you must learn to recognize when a gift is actually a sales device. Once you identify the favor as a maneuver, you are no longer psychologically bound by the rule of reciprocation. You can accept the gift for what it is while politely declining the subsequent pressure. Human beings have an obsessive desire to be, and to appear, consistent with what they have already done or said. Once we make a choice or take a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. This consistency is highly valued by society and allows us to avoid thinking through every situation from scratch. Cialdini explains that the key to using this principle is the initial commitment. If a compliance professional can get you to make even a small, seemingly insignificant commitment, they can later use that to pull you toward larger requests. This is known as the foot-in-the-door technique, where a small yes paves the way for a massive one. The most effective commitments are those that are active, public, and effortful. When we write something down or declare it to others, our self-image shifts to align with that action. We then feel an internal drive to live up to that new image to avoid cognitive dissonance. Cialdini also discusses lowballing, where a great deal is offered to secure a decision, only for the deal to be changed after the commitment is made. Even when the original reason for the decision is removed, people often stay committed because they have built new justifications for their choice. To combat this, you must listen to your gut and your heart of hearts to realize when you are being trapped by a foolish consistency. The principle of social proof suggests that we determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. We view a behavior as more correct in a given situation to the degree that we see others performing it. This shortcut allows us to make fewer mistakes when navigating unfamiliar social settings, but it can be manipulated easily. Cialdini points to examples like canned laughter on television shows, which triggers us to laugh even when the jokes are not particularly funny. Social proof is most powerful under two conditions: uncertainty and similarity. When we are unsure of ourselves or the situation is ambiguous, we are most likely to look to others for guidance. This can lead to pluralistic ignorance, where a crowd of people fails to help a victim because everyone is looking at everyone else to see if a crisis truly exists. We are also more influenced by the actions of people who are similar to us. This is why testimonials from ordinary people are so prevalent in advertising. The chapter also discusses the dark side of social proof, such as the Werther effect, where highly publicized suicides lead to a spike in similar deaths. To protect ourselves, we must recognize when the actions of the crowd are being faked or based on misinformation. We should never put our total trust in a social compass that might be broken. We prefer to say yes to the requests of someone we know and like. This principle is seemingly obvious, but the ways in which liking can be manufactured are subtle and surprising. Cialdini identifies several factors that increase our liking for a person, the first being physical attractiveness. We tend to attribute positive traits like intelligence and kindness to attractive people in a halo effect that we are largely unaware of. Similarity is another major factor. We like people who dress like us, share our background, or have similar interests. Praise is also incredibly effective. Even when we know flattery is being used for a purpose, we still tend to like the person giving it. Increased familiarity through repeated contact also breeds liking, provided the contact is positive or cooperative. This is why the good cop/bad cop routine works so well, as the good cop appears to be a friendly ally in a hostile environment. Additionally, the association principle links a person to the things they represent. This is why celebrities endorse products or why we want our local sports team to win. It makes us look better by association. To defend against the liking principle, you must separate your feelings for the requester from the merits of the deal itself. If you find yourself liking a salesperson more than you should after only a few minutes, that is a signal to step back and evaluate the offer objectively. The principle of authority highlights our deep-seated sense of duty to authority figures. Cialdini references the famous Milgram experiments, where ordinary people administered what they believed were lethal electric shocks simply because an authority figure told them to. We are trained from birth that obedience to proper authority is right and disobedience is wrong. This creates a shortcut where we follow the instructions of an expert without actually thinking about the wisdom of those instructions. Unfortunately, we are often triggered not by true authority, but by the mere symbols of authority. Titles like doctor or professor can carry immense weight even when the individual is speaking outside their field of expertise. Clothing, such as a lab coat or a business suit, can also trigger our automatic compliance. Even trappings like expensive cars can signal high status and command our deference. Compliance professionals often use these symbols to bypass our critical thinking. To defend yourself, you should ask two questions. Is this authority truly an expert? And how truthful can we expect this expert to be? By focusing on the authority's credentials and their potential for bias, you can break the spell of mindless obedience. It is important to distinguish between having authority and being an authority. This chapter reminds us to question the source before we follow the lead. The scarcity principle states that opportunities seem more valuable to us when their availability is limited. The thought of losing something motivates us more than the thought of gaining something of equal value. This is why phrases like limited time only or while supplies last are so effective in marketing. Scarcity works because we use availability as a shortcut for quality. If something is hard to get, it must be good. Furthermore, as things become less available, we lose freedoms, and we hate to lose freedoms we already have. This leads to psychological reactance, where we desire the restricted item more than ever before to reassert our control. Cialdini notes that scarcity is most effective when an item has recently become scarce, as opposed to being always scarce, and when we are in competition with others for it. This is why limited stock sales or auctions can drive people into a frenzy. The emotional response to scarcity is so powerful that it blocks our ability to think rationally. To defend yourself, you must realize that the scarcity of an item does not make it taste, feel, or work any better. When you feel the surge of excitement caused by a scarce item, take it as a warning sign to slow down. Ask yourself if you want the item for its utility or simply because you want to possess something rare. By focusing on the function of the product, you can avoid overpaying for the thrill of the hunt. In the final chapter, Cialdini reflects on the modern world and how our reliance on these psychological shortcuts is increasing. We live in an information-heavy age where we are constantly bombarded with choices, and we often don't have the time or energy to process every decision deeply. Because of this, we will continue to rely on the single-trigger responses discussed throughout the book. While these shortcuts are necessary for survival in a fast-paced society, they become dangerous when they are deliberately faked or manipulated by those seeking to profit at our expense. Cialdini argues that we should not allow compliance professionals to trick us by providing counterfeit signals of authority, scarcity, or social proof. He calls for a boycott against those who use these principles unethically, as they are polluting the shortcuts we need to function. We must protect our right to use these heuristics fairly by fighting back against deceptive influence tactics. The book concludes with a reminder that while we are prone to influence, awareness is our greatest shield. By understanding the mechanics of persuasion, we can navigate the world more effectively and ethically. Influence is a tool, and like any tool, its impact depends on the hands that hold it. This chapter ties all the principles together into a call for social responsibility and personal vigilance. We must be conscious consumers of influence to remain truly free.